Hey guys, how are you? I hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing a movie review. This movie is a horror comedy from the United States, English language, released in the year 2014, directed by Marjani Satrapi, and this movie is called The Voices. So The Voices is about Jerry, who is a packaging worker. He is very liked by his co-workers. He's got a very good personality. Although he's a little bit weird, he seems to get on with everybody. But what his co-workers don't know is that he is mentally ill as a result of some traumas in his past, and he's seeing a psychiatrist to try and get on top of that, and at the same time he's trying to act as though he is a normal person, but he's clearly not. So one day he asks a co-worker who he has a crush on if she would like to go out on a date, and she says yes. And so he's surprised by this. He goes back home, he's really excited. His pets, who are his best friends, he talks to them as though they are humans, and he's just really excited. So he gets to the restaurant that they're supposed to meet at, but this co-worker never turns up. So he's devastated, and this is the start of his downward spiral as his traumatic events from his past, the events that shape him as a person, are coming to a front, and his alter egos are starting to take full effect and ultimately put all of those around him in grave danger. So what happens at that point on? Something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on The Voices. As far as mental illness is concerned, I think The Voices actually shows mental illness in a very respectful way, which was very surprising because this is actually a horror comedy. Now with mental illness, when you get into films, it is very much stereotypical. You've got the nutcase who has no likable qualities, who's just demonized to the point where he's a monster. And I think that's very insulting for people who, like myself, are going through mental illness. And I think it's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of ignorance behind mental illness, and that's the reason why it creeps people out. And that's the reason why you've got all these characters who are schizophrenic, who have depression, or all those sort of mental illnesses that do affect a lot of people. In movies, they kind of symbolize that as monster, and that's why it causes people to feel like they're outcasts. And so when they see these films, I was worried that The Voices would fall into the same trap, but I think Marjani Satrapi shows a true understanding of how devastating mental illness can be, not only on one person, but those around them. And I think that although the movie is a horror comedy, it does show you a cautionary tale about mental illness, the devastating effects, and how destructive it can actually be. So I think this was a very emotional film. It does pull at the heartstrings, and at the same time you've got horrifying sequences of violence. So a lot of films don't really get that balance right, but I thought Marjani Satrapi has equal laughs and equal shocks. And so if you are a fan of horror comedy, I think that The Voices really understands what the subgenre is, and it delivers it on almost every level. So the cinematography, very good. It was very colourful, very joyous, but at the same time you have a very sinister undertone. And you really symbolises the mental state that Jerry was in. Basically, he's living in his fantasy world because his fantasy world is his refuge from reality, and the fantasy world is all laughter, all very, very bright and just very clean, but his reality is so much different. So you start getting lost in his fantasy, and you don't know how devastating the actual reality is until you actually see his reality. And I thought the conflicting sort of worlds between his fantasy and his reality, I thought they were very, very contrasting, very different, and it's just very frightening to see what he actually does while thinking what he's actually doing. So his fantasy is completely different from his reality, and I think you really get into the mindset of a guy who is very seriously disturbed. The continuity of the film was fairly decent. There were moments that I thought could have used a little bit more editing. There was violence there that I thought was very hard-hitting. It wasn't gratuitous. So the whole film, although it's having fun, although it is very entertaining, although it is very funny and at the same time very shocking, I still think it grounds itself in a very respectful manner. So it's not making fun of mental illness, it's really getting mental illness out there. And so I think that a lot of people should talk about mental illness a lot more, and I think that films like this, it really shows you the devastating consequences. And I think that Jerry's character in particular was very sympathetic. This is a guy that wasn't just a monstrous villain. He wasn't taking pleasure in what he was doing. He wasn't a sociopath. He was a guy that was ill, that wasn't taking his medication very well, and that he was just struggling to cope with the traumas of his past. And so I just think he was very, very sympathetic. It was actually very sad in some areas, but then you've got that likable quality to him that's starting to break through, and he wants to get a happy life. He wants to have a shot at happiness that everyone's entitled to, but you feel that he's never quite going to get there, and what makes it even more devastating. Thought the acting from Ryan Reynolds was great. He really plays that quirky character very well. It actually feels like this is an actor who has a lot of confidence in himself, and that's allowed to shine through. He's very strange. He feels like a guy that's a little bit creepy, but he's the type of guy that you want to be around. So once again, Marjani Satrapi hasn't actually just generalized this guy as a demon. In fact, she's actually made this character as a person that you can be friends with, but at the same time is just a very pathetic kind of guy, but a guy that really should have got more attention than he actually did. The acting from the supporting cast, Gemma Adderton, she plays the love interest, the co-worker. Her role wasn't really that great. She was definitely a cameo kind of character. And I thought the supporting character, Anna Kendrick, you've also got Jackie Weaver, I thought the other characters weren't really used as well as they could have been. I thought that Jerry's character was by far the most interesting, but the other characters were there just to make a side plot. And I just think that as the calibre of this cast, it wasn't used as well as it should have been. So you got three very good actors. I just thought they were wasted to a point where I just couldn't help but feel that this movie could have been a lot more. But these three talented actresses, they weren't really able to show how good of an actresses they are, and so I just thought that was a little bit of a wasted opportunity there. But having said that, there are moments in this film that are incredibly surreal and bizarre, and then you've got moments that will really tug at the heartstrings and makes it a very devastating, emotional, cautionary tale about the consequences of mental illness. So it is very shocking in some areas, very violent. I wouldn't say gory, very violent, but on the other hand, you've got something that you can really think about. So my only problems with the film, as I said, the wasted talent, but also the fact that it doesn't really have a lasting impact on you. Yes, it is a movie that will make you feel sad and everything, but there's not enough depth to make you really remember it any time, after you've watched it. And so I think that although the movie does try and hit you on a very serious level, at the same time intertwine different elements in the movie, it could have been just a little bit more memorable. And I think that the way it could have been a lot more memorable is if those three actresses actually had a little bit more depth in their characters to make it grounded in much more realism than it already had. So that was my biggest problem with the movie. But having said that, it's still a movie that I would recommend if you are a fan of the horror comedies. And so as a result of that, I'm going to give The Voices 3.5 stars. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.